Okay. Hey everyone, welcome to a new show that we're trying out, which is the Coach Forum. So what we're going to do is we're going to look over some stuff that people have sent in already and talk about it. So I'm going to react to it, but then we're going to discuss it. This is the best way at the moment I've got for chat. These was all put together at the very last minute, so it might well change as we go. I'm thinking that the YouTube doesn't need to be that big, and this is the only way that you guys can see both YouTube and Twitch chat. So let me know if that works for you. But either way, we're going to get started. So we've got a few things actually that inspired this whole show from St. Mary's about a basketball team, then a couple that came to mind as soon as I said maybe we should do it, and then a few more from Jack as well. So what we're going to do is just watch them, react to them as we go. If you have any thoughts, put them in the chat, and we'll basically just kind of discuss these concepts together. I'll always try and see if I can apply it to League of Legends, apply it to what might be useful for you if you're like an aspiring coach or even a coach with a lot of experience. And let's just think about it as we go. So starting out with these couple of things about basketball.
If you're a college basketball nerd like me and enjoy looking at analytics sites like KenPom and Bhrett, you've probably seen the usual and expected suspects at the top of the rankings. There's Houston, Tennessee, UCLA, Alabama, Purdue, St. Mary's. Wait, St. Mary's? I'm pretty sure a lot of us, including myself, had that same reaction one day when scrolling through these sites, and I think it was a fair one to have. Here was the team of this small private school in California, who earlier in the season had lost games to New Mexico, Washington, and Colorado State, but somehow the metrics still loved them and their unique style of play. St. Mary's is anything but flashy, yet for longtime head coach Randy Bennet, who's been there since 2001, it works. And now with their most recent win over Gonzaga, the Gales are sitting at 21-4 with a WCC record of 10-0, and they are looking more and more like a team worthy of getting a protected seed in the NCAA tournament. So let's get to know the Gales and see what—
I don't know any of the details of basketball. Apologies for that. So if anyone asks me what any of that means, I don't know. We're going to say it a little bit faster.
It's no secret that St. Mary's has been one of the more consistent mid-major programs in the country over the last 20 years. Since Bennet took over in 2001, the Gales have been to 8 NCAA tournaments, with 5 of those appearances being at-large bids, and they've gotten past the first round 3 different times, with the Sweet 16 appearance coming in 2010 when the Gales featured a young Matthew Dellavedova on the roster. Despite all their success, though, the current version of St. Mary's might be the most promising. As the Gales possess a top 5 defense in the country per Bhrett, they play a draining style that mentally wears down opponents, and they have a roster filled with experienced players who know their roles. All in all, the more you look at St. Mary's, the more those lofty analytical rankings seem to make sense. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that St. Mary's plays the most exciting brand of basketball you've ever seen, but the Gales are interesting to watch, and they're—
That is an interesting thing, right? Like there was a story from Peter Dunn where he was talking to a team owner, and the owner was saying, like, it's not enough to just win. You have to win in the way that, like, we want and the way that's exciting. And for me, I just think that's complete bollocks. I think whatever it takes to win. Like, we had some people quite upset about some of the wins we got on previous teams I worked with, like Solari, for example. It was Casey as well, so that makes it worse. We had identified that while they were incredibly strong laners, they really, really struggled to finish games. So we just drafted loads of range and loads of scaling. They got really ahead, and then they couldn't finish the game, and then they lost. So everyone was really angry, like, oh, you can't fight them. Like, yeah, no, we won the game when they have 10 times our budget. I'm okay with this. So that's an interesting one, but it's, I guess, obviously, if you're just a fan, it's a bit different, maybe.
Own way. They're one of the slowest playing teams in the country, as their 62 possessions per game ranks 355th out of 363 Division I teams, and they have the ability to grind a game to a halt whenever they really want to. And yes, this style can get monotonous and boring, but that's exactly what St. Mary's wants you to think. Because they are so deliberate and take so long on offense, the defense is more likely to make a mistake, and this is how St. Mary's punishes opponents. And don't confuse low scoring and slow pace for inefficient offense either, because the Gales currently have a top 40 offense in the country, as they hit—
But that's an interesting idea, right? Like, you can also have the same sort of thing in League. Like, Gen G are not the most exciting team, but they're fucking good. They're the best team, but they're not exciting, and they scale up and they get all the resources on the map always, and then eventually you just lose because they're just better in team fights, and they pick like Smolder or whatever.
36% of their threes as a team, don't turn the ball over, and they grab...
Taking long on offense is actually using stamina playing. Yeah, taking long on offense is like scaling. Sort of, yeah. But the point as well that I like is that there is a straight... has a straight analogy. Is at one point he mentioned like they wait for the opponents to make a mistake. And I think that's an interesting choice. And that's a choice that we can make in League. You can just play really solid, a decent amount of scaling, and you wait for the opponents to play, and you just make it difficult for them to do stuff. And eventually they'll make a mistake. Yeah, I think you have to. I think that's right. You do have to tie in your way of playing to your culture as well, wherever you can. I mean, obviously in League we struggle with that because most teams don't really have a culture, let alone have thought about it enough to tie it into how they play. I guess G2 you could say, maybe not this roster, but previous rosters like seem to have a lot of fun, seem to be open to trying out a lot of new things. So you can do it a little bit.
A fair amount of offensive rebounds. The Gales aren't bad, they're just different.
No, you're different because you're better. How are they better? No, look, you're both better different. In a different but better way.
Although their offense is certainly passable though, St. Mary's signs primarily for their defense. The Gales are solid all around the floor as they are relentless in screen navigation, great in help situations, and also incredibly long in the front court, with Alex Dukas, Kyle Bone, and Mitchell Saxon all possessing long wingspans. While St. Mary's forces turnovers at a decent rate of around 20% of their defensive possessions, their main skill is really just forcing misses and closing possessions. Because St. Mary's is so disciplined on defense, opponents have an average effective field goal percentage of 44.9%, which is the 11th lowest number in the country, and this is also bolstered by St. Mary's defensive rebounding rate of close to 80%, which is second best in the country. St. Mary's offense already does a great job at limiting possessions and shot attempts over the course of a game, and when combined with their brilliance at not allowing second chance points, it becomes very difficult to get into a rhythm against the Gales. Per College Basketball Reference, opponents of St. Mary's only attempt 51.6 shots per game, which is the 12th fewest in America. And
the other thing you can do, right, is that if you have such an articulated style, then your training can make you better at that style. It's obviously not quite the same for League because mostly our training is just playing the full game. And so it's harder to be a bit more specialized. But let's say you're allowed to make drills or you're allowed to have save states if they ever do that, which they never will. But if they ever do, then you could have teams who are like, we're just going to get really good at like mid and late game situations, and they play the early game much less. Stuff like that. And then when you get to that point, they're much more comfortable, which I think is quite an interesting idea as well, to sort of be a bit specialized. Again, as Rocco was saying, when you have the culture and you don't necessarily have the resources to just compete on like a straight firepower kind of point of view.
The Gales only allow teams to shoot 40% from the field as it is, they become an insanely hard team to score against. When you look at the roster of St. Mary's, you'll notice a lot of experienced players, but it's actually a freshman who's leading this team to potentially the best season in school history. And if you didn't catch the last 10 minutes of their recent game against Gonzaga, let me introduce you to...
Here he goes again, Hayden Mahaney!
Mahaney is the lone freshman who gets significant minutes for St. Mary's, and he's become the Gales' most important offensive weapon. The 6'3 guard is the team's leading scorer as he's averaging 15 points a game, and he's also been the go-to guy in clutch situations, as evidenced by...
This is not a point related to coaching, but I absolutely love how they do school sports in America. I'm just thinking about this and thinking like, so it wasn't me, but like on our school rugby team, for example, we had some really good players. Like as in other than me, other people who are really good players. And then people who are like county players, people like close to England spots, that kind of thing. And there would be like 10 people watching. This is like so hype to play. And like you'd be so much more, you'd think you'd be so much more used to it by the time you went pro.
The aforementioned Gonzaga game and the BYU game in which he hit the game-winning shot with under a second left. He's shooting 46% from the field and 41% from three, and he's emerged as one of the most effective freshmen in the entire country. Mahaney has a swagger and confidence about him that few players of his experience have, and Randy Bennet has allowed him to do his thing, as he leads the team in field goal attempts per game, despite not breaking into the starting lineup until early December. Mahaney is a crafty ball handler and finisher who uses change of pace extremely well to break down defenders and get to the rim. While his at-the-rim numbers are pretty average compared to the rest of Division 1, he still has unbelievable touch around the basket. Watch here how he uses his change of pace to get to the rim, where he finishes with a beautiful left-handed layup. Mahaney is also a sound jump shooter who is capable of getting his own shot at pretty much any time. In fact, the freshman is shooting 43% from mid-range this season, and perhaps even more impressive, none of these makes have been assisted this year, thus showcasing his elite self-creation value. Mahaney's high-level three-point shooting makes him a complete three-level scorer, and he's the type of guard that can absolutely thrive in the NCAA tournament. Alongside Mahaney in the backcourt, you have longtime St. Mary's safety Logan Johnson, who averages a little over 12 battle on the boards either, as he's averaging close to 5 rebounds per game. In addition to his hustle, Johnson also snatches a little over a steal and a half per game, as he has extremely quick hands on the defensive end. Watch here how he just darts in and takes the ball away from New Mexico's Jamal Mashburn Jr. 6'6" small forward Alex Dukas is also in his fourth year at St. Mary's, and the senior has shown steady improvement throughout his career, as he's gone from averaging 15 minutes and 4 points a game as a freshman to now averaging 30 minutes and 12 points a game as a senior. Dukas helps St. Mary's defensively thanks to his length. He's able to stop drivers in their tracks and contain the ball extremely well. He's also become a lethal three-point shooter, as he's knocking down.
I think the details of other sports are maybe less useful. Which is why we're going through this one quite quickly.
St. Mary's starting center is 6'10" junior Mitchell Saxon, and he's the anchor of the Gales' suffocating defense, as he's blocking 1.5 shots per game in addition to.
But it is interesting, like so much of sport is about like recruitment and stuff like that, and that's why I think this position that's focused more on the long-term performance of teams is what we're really missing in esports, because it's mostly like we can talk about the coaching, we can talk about the culture, all that kind of stuff, but you can't set a culture if everything's changing every couple of years, you know? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, because in a couple of years it'll be different. So the team has no culture, the organization has no culture, which means that if a team does set a culture, it's like just them as their own little ball. You know, it's not like you're going to keep recruiting players. There's an example. Greg Popovich used to have this thing where all the scouts at the bottom of their sheet would have a box that says not a Spur, and if that box is ticked, it doesn't matter what the rest of it is. They wouldn't take the player. But imagine doing that for any team. I don't think any team is in the position to be able to do that, because they don't know what a fanatic player is. Like, because there isn't a thing, you know. So that's what I mean. But at the end of the day, like recruitment is such a big thing. It actually reminds me of this thing I was thinking about yesterday. I don't know. Please don't spoil the Mont Ventoux stage if you have seen it, because I'm one day behind. I don't know if anyone likes cycling here or the Tour de France. But I was just thinking, like, there's sort of two massive teams, and then Ineos is also a very, very big team. But the problem is that potentially the best rider in history is currently riding for UAE. And he's still quite young, unfortunately. And cycling is a sport where you could probably have infinite money. And if you didn't have Tadej Pogacar, you probably still wouldn't win. Because as long as, like, you could take the second best cyclist all the way down to the 10th best, and that would be your team of 9 or whatever, like how many riders you need for the Tour de France, for example. And if he had him and then 11th to 18th, I still think he might win. And so, like, at the end of the day, like, recruitment is just such a big part of all of sport, but I think we're really, really terrible at that. And so we just like move pieces around, and sometimes we get lucky, like G2 in 2017 or whatever it was, when they have like perks caps and stuff like that, and you get good players and it just works. Sometimes you get unlucky, like all the Vitality super teams where they were just splashing money around and none of them were ever as good as the players, or the Misfits one, for example. But I don't know how much there is to learn from it, you know, to be quite honest.
As a ball screen defender, as he can hedge and recover as well as anybody in the country. Watch here how Saxon will play at the level of the screen and then recover.
Yeah, I think having every player have a role in the system, I think is really important. But again, most people don't have a specific system about how they play League, and so they don't know what they need to find in their recruitment either.
Speaking of a lack of offensive production, St. Mary's fifth starter is 6'8" Kyle Bowen, and despite only averaging 5.7 points per game, Bowen might be one of St. Mary's most valuable players. His 7.8 rebounds per game is second on the team behind Saxon, and together they help.
This is just still all the players.
But other than him, this is a very top-heavy Gales roster. And while guys like Luke Bhrett and Harry Wessels will get spot minutes each night, this team is driven by a starting five, as they make up 78% of the team's total minutes this year. Now, we spent time explaining why St. Mary's style of play is so effective, but I'd be remiss to not mention the concerns of playing this way as well. Because of their slow pace, St. Mary's naturally has less of a margin for error when it comes to games. If you think about it, the less possessions featured in a game, the more likely it becomes that the inferior team can get lucky and win. Typically, playing slow is a method used by worse teams to try and prevent the game from getting out of hand. And St. Mary's is used to playing the role of an underdog, especially in bigger games. But all of a sudden, the Gales are a legitimately good team, and if you look at their metrics, they should be expected to win most of the games they play. But what happens when you take a style used by underdogs and apply it to a nationally elite team? Well, you can get games like Virginia's 2018 loss to UMBC in the NCAA tournament, where the game was slowed down to a point where the Cavaliers simply didn't have enough possessions to mount a shred of a comeback after a slow start. It's this type of game that should worry St. Mary's. Yeah, they can control the game with their pace, but they do open themselves up to potential upsets as a result of it as well. That being said,
that's quite basketball specific, right? Because it's so like possession, and like score, that kind of thing. But yeah, I guess the same thing sort of applies. Like if you play slow scaling and you take less agency on the early game, then yeah, if the opponents make a mistake, you win. But if they play perfectly, maybe you don't win. And then it's like, that's tough. Personally, for me, I'd always rather play the other way. I'd always rather play in league the team with more agency. I'd rather us lose the game than we just don't do anything and hope the opponent doesn't win, you know? But again, it depends. It's about finding the best thing for you and just working the best with what you've got, and really having a good assessment of the tools that you have available to you is a good first step for all that.
And talented. And when you add a freshman like Mahaney into the mix of a team that was already very good last year, it's easy to see why St. Mary's should have a deep tournament run in their sights come March. And either way, it's safe to say that this has been one of St. Mary's best seasons ever. And given that, the Gales have certainly earned every right to go wild. Thanks so much for watching, and give me your thoughts below.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. I'm going to do a little bit of a change of pace. What we do is we have 2 or 3 videos from each of the sort of sections. So I'm going to jump to one of the other ones, which is much shorter and just actually, it's not even a conversation. It's highlights, but I think it's interesting. And I think there's probably a bunch of individual things that we can break down, which I think are really useful. It's a bit old though, so you might have seen it already. 8 years ago. So this is one of my people I look up to the most in coaching, which is Brailsford, but we'll watch it together.
This afternoon, we have someone who is hailed as a sporting guru. He transformed the British Olympic cycling team into probably the best sports team in the world. And at Team Sky, his riders have delivered 3 Tour de France victories in the last 4 years.
I think by the end it was like 8 out of 9 years or out of 10 years or something like that.
Would you please give a warm welcome to Sir Dave Brailsford.
I'd fit in on this stage.
You know, I wasn't great at school, but I found my calling, if you like, in sports science, sports nutrition, sport. I loved it all. There was a lot of crossover between the good bits of sport that business could learn from, but there's an awful lot of good practice in business that sports could learn from.
This, I think, is really important for esports teams. I think so much of what we do in esports, people look down on any kind of good process because they think it's too corporate or something. I've literally had people say that. Like, I say, okay, we should have an onboarding process. So that means when people join our company, we've got a step-by-step thing of what we do with them. Even like we give them a thing that says, welcome to the company. We give them a jersey. If it's Berlin and they've never been to Berlin, we give them like a bus card. We explain how the bus system works. For example, I did one like for us in Solari because I asked for it a bunch of times and it never happened. So I just did one for us, which was like a bus pass because you can't pay card in Zor, or you couldn't. Please, someone tell me that's changed in the last 4 years. You couldn't pay for buses with just card. So you have to have the exact right change or a special travel card thing. So I got a travel card for them with like 10 trips on it, plus a printed out sheet of, okay, this is the house, this is how the cleaning supplies work, this is how this works, and then here's a bunch of restaurants that are near that are really good and roughly what they're like, all that kind of thing. It was just like three pages or something. And I've had people say to me, we shouldn't do that kind of thing because it's too corporate. And that just makes me so sad. Like, don't throw everything out just because it's like a business thing and you want to be a business, you want to be like a startup and a sports team rather than a business team. And again, none of these ideas are new now, but the reason that everyone knows them is because even if you don't know cycling, is because they were so successful that they instantly went everywhere else.
90% of my time is spent thinking about and watching people I've got in the team. And you genuinely get inside their shoes and see the world through their eyes. And can you create an optimal environment where a human being is going to have the...
Wait, you from Tor, Rocco?
best chance of being the best they could possibly be?
I mean, to be honest, anything that's like a one-line dismissal of anything is already a problem, right? There's already something going on behind that. I think mostly the thing that goes on behind it is the people who started these companies didn't think that they would didn't want to end up in a situation where they're like a big business, and they wanted to be not in a big business, but now they have got a big business, so they need to have good processes. Sorry, my light was too yellow. I knocked it by accident. Oh, no, yeah, I did. I said both one by one. The thing that I set up was in Tor because no one would do it, and when I was suggesting it, it was in Berlin, and no one did that either. Anyway.
That business could learn from, but there's an awful lot of good practice in business that sports could learn from. 90% of my time is spent thinking about and watching people I've got in the team. And you genuinely get inside their shoes and see the world through their eyes. And can you create an optimal environment where a human being is going to have the best chance of being the best they could possibly be? When we started out, the top of the mountain for us seemed so far away. If you just stop for a minute, you say, is there any way that you could progress a little bit from where you are now? Of course there is, yeah. I could do that a little bit better. I could do this a little bit better.
That obviously is the big idea, right? Like that's the one that's been... I often see people in esports quoting it, and I know what they're doing behind the scenes. So I'm like, I don't think you really understand this in the same way that I do. Not that I understand it correctly, but like one of us doesn't, I guess. Which is this idea of marginal gains and looking at like everything. So for some backstory, they had a whole load of money when they started with the Olympic team, but they'd won something like 1 bronze medal in the history of the Olympics in cycling out of 60 chances or something like that by that point. And then by 2012, it was like 7 golds of possible 10 golds and all that kind of thing. And it stayed around that for a while because other teams in other countries would target a specific event and put everything into one specific event. But it was just like this absolutely crazy change. And for example, when they started on the Tour de France, no British rider had ever won. And they said, we're going to win with a British rider in 5 years. They actually did it in 3, I think, if I remember. But the point is that you're literally trying to do something that's never been done. Like people are way closer. A Western team is way closer to having won Worlds than a British rider was to have won the Tour de France. And yet from this like one big change of attitude and change of direction and luck and being very ahead of the curve and all those kind of things, it became like for a decade of dominance of the British team. Obviously it wasn't all British riders, it was mostly British riders who were winning as well, but not all. So it's this is why when people say like I want to win Worlds, I think if you're saying that as a coach in the West, it's a little, it's not too far-fetched or anything like that. I think it's definitely possible. But the idea that it's impossible to build a structure that will one day win Worlds is crazy, that people think that that's impossible. Again, so much less likely looking at all the data. I'm sure there's 100 of examples of that in sport. So this sport moves coaching away from teaching to the right player with resources. This person does. So this person, he was like the director of performance, or the head of performance. I mean, it's called different things in different structures, but like the head of performance for Team GB. Then he was the team principal for Sky, which is like the same as team principal in F1. If you've seen any of the Drive to Survive, he's like more like the person behind the coaches, the person thinking about the long term. He was there in Sky from the very beginning. He's now director of performance at Ineos. Has been there still 20 years or whatever it is now, and he was at the Olympic team from 1998, I think, until 2012. I think they did it mostly for that one thing. But as an example, he joined in 1998. They had a load of lottery funding in, and they said, we want to do well in our Olympic Games in 2012. So they had 14 years. And that's how and then in those 14 years, they did become the best team in the world. Whereas what we're talking about is like, good luck if you get to talk about a couple of years. And during that time, you'll probably be told to change things that you didn't want to change. And that's why we won't win. I need to research this example fully, and I will do if I make a video about it. But there's that story where the Shy was taken by IG when he was very young, like 14 or something. And he was brought to China, I think, and they just basically had him streaming and playing League until he was old enough to be a pro. And then when he was a pro, when he was 17, he became a pro for them. And they ended up winning Worlds in 2018, which sounds already impressive. But then if you think, actually, that means that in like season 3 or something, when the LCS was just starting, EU LCS, NA LCS was just starting, there was already someone thinking 4 years in advance, this might pay off. You know, so like no wonder we're behind. And we can talk about working harder or scrim culture or whatever as much as you want, but like until that is not a crazy story or even a crazy thing to think in the West, I don't think we'll ever kind of catch up.
It doesn't matter how small the improvement, we're going to do it. We're going to energize each other, and we're going to create.
And again, I think that part's so important. It doesn't matter how small the improvement is, we're going to do it. And the idea is that everyone starts to look out for anything that we could do better. Yeah, of course. It's a specific situation and it's only one example, but I just mean, or T1, for example, right? They had this huge dominant period. 4 out of the 5 of their starting roster came through their own academy system and their own scouting. Everyone except from Carrier on that roster came through the T1 system. So, you know, we're not competing with that. Or KC now are paying off thinking just a couple of years in advance. And also, of course, they're paying, like you have to put the caveat of the fact that KC, even before they joined the LEC, was still one of the best places to go and all that kind of thing. So, yeah. But they're with Kalist and with Vladdy, they're taking up a couple of people who've come up through their system. Although Vladdy, obviously, again, both these players were already pretty good by the time they joined, but still, you know, now they have 3 teams. If we start seeing KC LEC players who've come up through their 3 teams, like the Blue Stars, is it? And then KC Blue, and then now I believe that we can win Worlds, you know? When I look in a couple of years and the KC players are all from the KC system, now we're talking about something and I don't even need to look at the players. That's how important I think all this stuff is. Yeah, I think as well, like you can't do everything. So the way that I like to think about it and the way that Chris Froome talked about it, who was one of the most successful Tour de France rider that they had, was that nothing is too small to be considered. It's not that we should do everything. It's that there's nothing that's thrown out because it's, like we just talked about, these one-line bullshit reasons to not do something. It's too corporate or it's not going to give us that much improvement. So on the Tour de France, for example, now it's common, but they travelled around with bedding, with pillows and with sheets for everyone. So that every hotel, you had the same pillow. And people were like, what's the point? That's such a small improvement. And it's like, yeah, and maybe it made like no difference. It probably didn't change you. That's not going to change you from coming second to coming first. But over a decade, that kind of attitude can make a huge difference. And so this idea that like the top of the mountain, winning Worlds is very far away, but can we just look around and think of the things that we can actually do better now with the resources that we have, resources including time? And that I think is a really healthy way to think about it. And if you're in that kind of environment, it can be really exciting. You're going to make mistakes as you
Culture,
go, but
which is about this idea of continuous learning, continuous improvement.
Continuous
we
learning,
differentiate
same
clearly
thing.
between their dreams, which is what we'd like to happen, win an Olympic medal, win the Tour de France, and targets. Targets are things I can make happen. You can make small change and be
like that as well. Differentiating between dreams and targets. I think that's really hard, obviously. Much harder in league than it is in like cycling, where you can say, a total wattage chart target or anything like that. But if you can ever find a way as a coach to make it about things that the players can control, that's much better. Because even the team can't control a lot of stuff. You know, like I was really ill before last finals. Chachi was ill during the first finals. We could have done some things, I'm sure, to prevent that, or to reduce the chance of it happening, but not prevent it. The current setup sadly doesn't benefit small LEC teams to go for the long-term investment. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think a lot of teams waste a huge amount of money and would do better with the money that they had if they thought about it long term. I think if you're a small team, if you're the like head of LoL on a small team, you have to be thinking, where's the value that other people are missing? And where's the value that people are missing is going to be different, you know. Or an ERL team, for example, is a good idea. It used to be, before the LEC, that the most overvalued players in ERLs were the ones that you'd heard of, the ones with the big names. And now I actually tend to think it's the opposite. Like Nord is not paying anyone on their roster. Yeah, okay, Jankos is in a special situation because he's making money from streaming. But like the fact that like Treats has not got a bunch of ERL offers is absolutely ridiculous, but it's because people recognize him. And they're like, okay, he's this good when he was on SK or when he was on Dignitas or TSM or whatever, you know? And so if you're a small team, finding the value that other people don't find is actually probably less about finding up-and-coming players because that's where everyone's looking now. But thinking long-term will always, I think, give you an edge because no one else is doing that. And so building a proper scouting department probably will save you lots of money. Considering even small teams, by the way, we're not talking like small as in they can't afford to pay any staff. We're talking small as in their players are only on 100k or whatever. Like the minimum salary in the LEC is like 80 or something, isn't it? So like we're not talking small like an actually small team. We're just smaller than like G2 or Fnatic.
Very, very good at delivering those small changes. Emotionally, it's very, very difficult not to think about the consequence of what we're about to do. I don't want to make a fool of myself. I don't want to look stupid. All of those emotions can hijack you right at the moment where you don't want it to happen. So forget the result. If you're worried about the bearing of the result, the chances of you performing well in that particular moment, at a particular day, is reduced.
And this obviously, two things. Firstly, it's so common now. Was a big deal 25 years ago. It's like this idea of the score will take care of itself, you know, all that kind of thing. But also so hard to do in practice, right? And you can't do it in practice if you know you're moving to the next team at the end of the year as well. Sorry to keep harping on about this same point, but I do think it's really important. Like the result does matter a lot. The result for us in summer matters a huge amount because we're probably all going to go to a new team afterwards. So there's no way to just think about the process of getting better because we're not guaranteed to stay, you know. No, I don't think the fact that we've lost transfer fees and stuff has got anything to do with the esports economy. I think it's because people were bad at it and they never tried even to do it. I mean, there are people who are getting transfer fees now because people are starting to realize, actually, maybe we shouldn't hire a player for 3 years and then not do anything with them until the 3 years are done and let them go somewhere else for free. Maybe we should actually look around at the end of the second year and transfer them for a bit of money. I mean, look at what Fnatic just did. They had probably like the second most expensive player on their roster for a load of years, including extending. And one split before he's about to be let go for free, they're paying him to sit on the bench. Now, I don't know if it's a mistake to move him to the bench. I know that the whole situation obviously was wrong. Something was very wrong here. Because you should have worked this out like at the beginning of the year and sold him to someone. Because now he's going to go somewhere else for free. And probably people like Vitality and Heretics, probably, or others, I'm sure, BDS maybe not BDS, actually, they're quite attached to Nuke. But I'm sure a bunch of teams were interested, and I'm sure Fnatic wanted too much money. And the other teams were also like, well, we'll have him in a couple of months anyway, won't we? He's free. He'll be free agent. So, like, the whole thing is a bit weird. Or like El Yoya, they messed up selling him to G2 when it became Yike. Or, you know, KC, like, there's been loads of teams that have done that. But there now are transfer fees, right? I think because people don't do stuff for their fans, then you only have fans if you're successful. But again, I'll use KC as the example because they came 10th and 9th or whatever in their first year, and everyone who didn't know KC or hasn't been to French events thought they're not going to have any fans after this because they're going to lose. No, not at all. Like they still are loads. They're still really passionate because they made it more than just winning. They made it about more than winning. I mean, Fnatic still has fans, even though Fnatic basically just made it about winning. Like, you like Fnatic because they won. G2 at least like had fun and tried new things and stuff like that. But anyway, it's my situation in summer, but also in general. Most people, their contracts runs out at the end of summer, so you have to think about the result. Most people still in esports, I think, have a contract of like a year. So you can't just think about the process. That's just what you tell yourself to be less upset about losing. Because it doesn't matter that you got better, and if you could rerun it back at the end of next year, you would win if the contract is up. Because then you got to go to a new team and they're going to look primarily at your result.
The whole notion of there's no I in team, and I must say I don't buy it. Whether we know it or not, we're kind of making a calculation. What's in this for me? So what I work very hard.
There's no I in team, I don't buy it. I think that's a really important thing to know as a coach. So he's saying work out what's in it for each person and work with that rather than getting them to be like selfless or anything like that. And okay, you might argue that it's a bit Randian or however you would say it, but I think there's a lot of truth in it.
Is I look at each individual and I try and figure out
This is amazing,
what's in it for them. If you can align what they're doing with a group of other people behind the goal, then you're in business. And it doesn't matter whether they get on or not.
Yeah, so find out what's in it for them, align that behind a goal, then you're in business. It doesn't matter whether they get on or not. I love that as an idea as well. So obviously great if we get along, but we don't have to. And I think a lot of coaches in esports have made the mistake of saying like they have to get along. And I think that actually happens like... I've had stories, I won't say who, of people who told me they were in like a team house, for example, and they really didn't like one player, and the coach's solution was to force those two players to share a room. So obviously it was a nightmare and a disaster, and they hated it. And like maybe sometimes that fixes it, but like they don't need to be friends. They need to be colleagues and find out what's in it for them and how they both need each other. Then it doesn't matter. I'd say they have fair weather fans that will usually get involved once things look up. Yeah, but again, if you, my point is just, yes, obviously winning is the biggest difference to whether you have fans or not in esports, but I don't think any team does content well, so I'm not willing to say that the only way to get fans is to do well. But UOL had loads of fans compared to how well their team did, right, back in the day? Because they were interesting, because they had Roman in a pink unicorn outfit, like all those kind of things. Like they did something a bit different. The question I think you have to ask is like, why would you be a fan of any of the teams we have in the LEC? And okay, KC and Koi, now you have those teams have reasons. G2 is maybe has a reason, I'm not sure. Like, you want to win, and you thought they would win. And that they used to seem to have a lot of fun. They used to be the most creative team, but not anymore. And so now you just become fans of like the players, and so you're a fan of this team because it's got the player that you like. But even then, you don't necessarily know that player all that well. So yeah, I mean, I know obviously this happens a lot in sport, and a lot of sport has the advantage of you're a fan of that team because that's your local team. But it's just interesting. We don't try anything different in esports for content, so I don't think you can use the past as a proof, because I think the past has not been done well. If you have animosity on a team like that, you're kind of using workaround at that point. I don't know what you were referencing there, Jack. If you're talking about the putting the players in the same room, then I think absolutely it's craziness. So it's a weird like workaround that like we just force them to spend enough time together and they'll enjoy each other.
I absolutely and utterly believe in giving people as much ownership as possible. For me, human beings, we like to have an
This was his really
influence
big thing as well.
What we do and how we do it.
Which again, now is super common. And as I was talking about, I think on the stream recently, now it's quite hard to find modern coaches who don't let the athletes have a big ownership say in things. But again, in like 1998, this was a really, really big deal. And the fact that it's just commonplace everywhere is partly due to people like him. And so there's Chris Hoy, for example, who won a bunch of medals. There was people was literally saying like he's not going to come into work if you don't tell him he has to be there at a certain time. Like now that seems crazy, but at the time people really thought that. And I've said that a bunch of times about esports players, and people have said the exact same thing. If you tell them you don't have to be somewhere, they don't have to get up in the morning, they're never going to get up. But then those aren't the players we want, guys. Like we have to find people who actually want to take some ownership of it. Yeah, I think a lot of organizations now are just trying to tie into this like nationalism thing, which was in a weird way, I think, such a good thing about esports, that we had teams across multiple countries, but it's also better than nothing, I think. So I'm happy that they are doing well.
The people who I see being successful, the doers, they get shit done. You can walk 1,000 miles, you can only do it a step at a time. But it doesn't take long before you've done quite a few steps. Yeah. If you go after all of these incremental gains, aggregating them together, we were capable of getting better. It was something that we could believe in and we could achieve.
Okay, that's number 2. So let's go for number 3. We're talking about coaching philosophy. 28 minutes.
He has a concept called mudita. It's not his concept. He read it in a book. He'll tell you that. He said, look, I was going through my life and I wanted 10 years. I've seen this massive explosion of a really great marketing tool. And I'm going to say this the right way about love-based leadership. Now, what I mean by that is I love the concept. I think the concept is 100% dead on. But if you use these words in a book, in a story, a leadership book, a coaching book, it sells a lot.
Is this the point you wanted to talk about, Jack? Love-based leadership. Well, we'll try. So, for example, that's what Max said, right? When I asked what in his Coach Talk episode, the first question of that is, what is coaching? And he said love or something like that.
Because it challenges each coach to look in the mirror and realize that maybe I'm not doing it from a love-based approach. But what happens is coaches and players think that the screen on the right, the kid in the bubble wrap, is what love-based coaching is. See, this is what I think is brilliant about love-based coaching is you as a coach should love your players so much that you're willing to do whatever it takes to help them reach their goals. I had a coach recently that
I quite like this. I quite like this kind of thinking. I do think the question that people have to bear in mind, though, is that same thing that I talk about a lot. We talked about on coach support. I tried to talk about with Mac and people like that. I think Edgar gave a really, really good answer. He's a sports psychologist, if you want to check out that episode. And it's that sometimes, okay, so if you love them, you'll help them achieve their goals. It's like, yeah, but I think you have to be quite specific. Like if you start being like, okay, this kind of love and not that kind of love, then I think it starts to get a little bit confusing for me. That's the only thing. I mean, I love the idea. Using the wrong word. I'm a big fan of the idea. I won't use love because then it will start getting confusing. But sometimes the long-term the long-term well-being of a player might not coincide with their goals, and it might not coincide with their best performance. So if it comes from a place of love, I think it's hard to say that you would do something that's worse for them in the long term. Yeah, we'll keep watching.
I found out from a couple of players, more than one, about 3, is trying to move players away from me to somebody that they trust. And we don't, it's fine. It's what happens. And I don't like it, but it's what happens. And
the full episode will be on YouTube as well, not just YouTube Live.
That the coach was saying that I give the same thing to every player. And that really upset me because I don't have a system. And then I thought back and said, in their critique of me, it was actually the greatest compliment could ever be given. Because I do give the same thing to every player.
I don't know if this is controversial, but I don't think you should give the same thing to every player. I think you should treat everyone equally, but I don't think you should treat them in the same way or anything like that. Anyway, we'll see what he means by that, because the problem with this is that I think, as with a lot of coaching stuff, it can get quite sort of fiddly and not so clear cut. And we could say the same thing, well, say the opposite thing and mean the same thing.
My coach, I give all of me. I give everything I have to you. I give everything I have in my time and my commitment and my information to.
I think that's very laudable and it would be great, but I also am okay that I don't do that. And I wouldn't ever advise, if I'm working with a coach, I wouldn't ever say that. There's a great one of Cody Royal's 7 hard truths about being a head coach is something like, you're not a coach, you're a person who coaches. And I think making sure that there's parts of you that you keep back, I think is important.
You, and I will go learn to make it better.
Yeah, give the same amount of effort to everybody, leadership. I think is great. That's what I meant. See, that's my point. That's what I mean by treating them equally, but not the same. Because I wouldn't actually treat them the same in terms of like a day-to-day situation. And not even the same in terms of time. Some people need more time, some people need less time. Some people need to be pushed, some people need to be pulled. Some people need more pressure, some people need less pressure. So I think you shouldn't say that you treat people the same in my way of thinking about all this. And again, I want to be really clear, like with all of this, whenever we're watching these videos and discussing them, I know it will come across as if like I know better, but I definitely don't. This is just my approach. And hopefully from a show like this, you guys can see that there's many ways to approach coaching, and that's why it's so amazing.
Love-based leadership is not carrying people around in bubble wrap and making sure that they don't suffer. Love-based leadership is when they suffer, I'm going to guide you. Love-based leadership is I'm going to demand more of you than you ever thought you had within you. I'm going to be fair, but I'm going to be stern. Research in parenting has shown 2 major factors are the greatest predictors of a kid's outcome. That you have high demands for the kid and you have high reinforcement strategies. Reinforcement, if we remember to Psych 101, there's 4. Positive reinforcement. You do X, you get Y. Y is a reward. I love it, so I'm going to do more of X to get more of Y. If you do X, I remove Y. That's negative reinforcement. So, in other words, if you guys really do well at practice, I'm going to take away conditioning. People will perform really good. Then there's punishment. If you do X, you're going to feel the wrath of Y. That's hard. People don't like it, but punishment works in the short term. Fear-based coaching works in the short term. It's not love-based coaching. It's fear-based coaching. but it works. But I don't think it's the best long-term plan. But sometimes
This is the thing, is that like if by love-based coaching he means coaching where like you're on the side of the player and you're trying to get the best out of them for them, rather than like if you're comparing it to fear-based coaching like you just did, then yeah, like I'm all for it. But I do think using the word love is a bit confusing, and it doesn't shock me that people keep understanding it like this picture on the right. In which case, maybe we should use a different word. Because I think Simon Cox said this thing to me, which I really love, which is we're in the pointy end of high performance, and it can be brutal. So I think that's an interesting one. Isn't leadership dependent on team chemistry and the emotional state of it? Your goal should still be to make each individual better. I think that's a great goal. Like what we just looked at as well, like find out what's in it for them and how you can get the best out of them. So that's how you get the best out of a group. It can be both. And certain coaches in certain roles will have more time in the group, more time individually. If you're an individual coach, you'll spend more time individually than with the group. And if you're the head coach, maybe the other way around. But genuinely wanting them to succeed rather than wanting them to perform for your team's outcome. Yeah, I think if you can do that, that's great. I don't know if that's always possible, but every time it is, it's better, for sure. Genuinely wanting them to succeed rather than wanting them to perform for your team's outcome. What happens if you have a player that you don't like? Maybe you work well together. Maybe you can get the best out of them. Maybe you can get more out of them than anyone else, but maybe you don't like them. Then what do? You just force yourself to like them somehow. Trick yourself to like them. Then I think that's when it becomes hard to treat everyone equally.
a little bit of fear is okay and still can fall within the love-based approach. The last one is habituation.
And this is where it starts to get for me a bit messy when we talk about this. Like, okay, my version of love-based leadership allows you to punish people and allows you for fear, but only enough that it's okay. Which is like, okay, but that just gives you the freedom to do whatever you want again, doesn't it? Maybe.
Extinction. Where you just stop paying attention to X and Y goes away.
I don't think you should scout people to only take players that you like, that you're friends with. I think that's a really bad approach. I think that's a really dangerous approach as well. I think that's one of the problems we have of like when people talk about systemic racism or systemic biases or like the patriarchy or whatever. That's the problem. It's like people taking people for co-workers that they basically would just be friends with. So I think it's completely fine to not like the people that you're coaching as a friend. You can know. I've worked with players who I know like we would not be friends if we were not on the same team. We wouldn't be friends, and that doesn't mean I haven't enjoyed working with them and there haven't been some good moments. But I think I didn't necessarily, like, if I'm actually being genuinely honest with myself, I wouldn't say that I wanted them to succeed more than I wanted them to succeed so that the team succeeded. And I think if you think that you're going to go through your coaching career only having one, I hope you do. But I think it's unlikely.
Okay. So when players today feel like they need more positive reinforcement, what they want is more reward. The problem with that is they never get out of their comfort zones because getting out of the comfort zone is a little punishing. The fact is most players train because of negative reinforcement, not positive. They train to eliminate an underlying insecurity. And therefore, by training more, gaining more confidence, that insecurity goes away. That, by definition, is negative reinforcement.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
You can do the same thing
like
as a coach.
players.
We want X to remove the pain of losing from us. But just make sure that when you invest in a player in today's generation, that you invest in them and tell them that you're investing in them. This generation is unique. They have been trained that great coaching smile and laugh with them all the time. So when you become hard on them or demand something, they reject you because they're not prepared for it. They think that everybody should get a trophy and everybody should get a ribbon and everybody should have success. Tell all my players, there's a couple things to always understand. Life is not fair. Coaches play favorites. Hard workers don't always win, and lazy people don't always lose. Life is not fair. Sometimes coaches make decisions. Sometimes the umpires make bad calls. And sometimes those bad calls keep a great team like the New Orleans Saints out of it. I would argue that you got to be in a position, and coach used to say, you've got to be in a position where that bad call doesn't affect you. If you go back and watch that Saints game, that wide receiver that got interfered with just stood up and picked up the ball. Imagine if he had sold it that he had been interfered with, that flag would have come every time. He wasn't ready for that moment. He will be next time. So invest in your players fully. Give them everything you got. But it's not about having puppy dogs and birthday parties and cake every day. Tell them, this young generation, tell them that you're going to expect a lot of them, demand a lot of them, and when you do, where it's coming from. And you have to do it before you go into it.
Yeah, I like the idea. I still think it's just confusing to call it love. I don't know. I don't have a better word though, so maybe it's the best word available. I also don't think you can invest. And again, when you say like invest everything, I'm pretty sure it doesn't mean that. But I know what he means. But also, then I think, why do you say it? Obviously, there's loads of things that I say that I shouldn't, and ways that I explain things that I shouldn't and stuff like that. But I think when you're going really deep into it, like you are preparing something, like I don't think you also can't invest your everything into multiple different people, you know, like at the very least, if you've got 10 people, surely you invest 10% in each of them. Like it depends. Again, I know what he means, but I just, hey man, but I just, I find the wording hard or difficult. Okay, let's go back to another one of these basketball ones. If it gets too technical and specific, sports specific, we'll go quickly. But other than that, I think it's really good. I mean, this is really useful for me because I'm seeing perspectives that I didn't know. So if you do want to submit any more clips or things like that, please do. You can find all the information for that on my Discord, which is either linked in the YouTube, or you can do !Discord. I'm going to do it here. On Twitch. And if you want to join there, you can submit clips. And I'm probably going to do this like each week, because the problem with doing other podcasts is that I needed someone else to also be free. Whereas when this is just me and you guys, then I can just do it whenever I want and whenever I have a moment. If there's not games to review or obviously scrims, I'll probably have at least the time every week to do something like this. And it's good for me because it keeps me thinking, keeps me moving forward, it keeps me exposed to new ideas and all that kind of thing, which is great. Maybe I could talk about some of the books I'm reading and stuff, but the downside is it takes me so long to read one. Well, not so long, but it takes me more than like I can do like a book summary a week kind of thing. The NFL approach, which is not always applicable to other sports, that athletes train for it from childhood onwards. What do you mean? So like we couldn't do a love-based approach in league because they only trained for it for a few years, or what do you mean? Okay, well, I'll start this clip, but if you do want to explain, go for it.
You go up and grab the ball off the rim when it comes off, and then you grab it with two hands, and you come down with it, and that's considered a rebound. So they got more of those than we did.
Using Torian Prince's textbook definition of a rebound, we can look at how Texas A&M grabs offensive rebounds. The Aggies currently lead the country in offensive rebounds per game, coming in at just under 16 per game. They have 4 players on the roster who average more than 2 offensive rebounds per game. Despite only being 6'6" and 190 pounds, Solomon Washington is able to grab 2.3 offensive rebounds per game. Anderson Garcia also comes in undersized at 6'7", 220 pounds, and he also grabs 2.3 offensive rebounds per game. Pharrell Payne is 6'9" and 250 pounds, and he grabs 2.4 offensive rebounds per game. And the leader of the team is 6'8", 250-pound Henry Coleman, who is currently grabbing 2.6 offensive rebounds per game. And they rebound just the way you would expect the best offensive rebounding team in the nation to rebound. They use their speed, their size, their athleticism, and then when it's a 50-50 ball, they grab the ball and they use their strength to rip it away from their opponents. But not every team in the country is able to use their speed, their size, their leaping ability, their quickness, and their athleticism to grab rebounds. And the St. Mary's Gales are one of those teams. Look at the roster of this team. Does this look like a team that has the same type of athleticism, leaping ability, explosiveness as a team like Texas A&M?
What do you mean by that?
But when you look at the best offensive rebounding teams in the country, the Gales are right up there. They are currently ranked 12th in the country, averaging just under 14 offensive rebounds per game, and they are 3rd in the country with an offensive rebounding percentage of 39.6 per
So they do
KenPom.
rebound?
Now you might be wondering, how are the Gales such a good offensive rebounding team when the title says they don't rebound, and when I just explained they don't have the luxuries that a team like Texas A&M has? It's because they don't try to use their athleticism and leaping ability to grab offensive rebounds. They use their IQ and their positioning to make sure that you, as a defender, can't get the defensive rebound. For St. Mary's, the offensive rebound starts with their big man, Mitchell Saxon, the 6'10", 250-pound center from Seattle, Washington. Saxon is averaging a ridiculous 4.2 offensive rebounds per game, which is 3rd in the country, only behind Oscar Clough and Zuby Ejiofor. And Saxon is not a above the hoop big man. He is an underneath the hoop big man, meaning he uses his size and his strength and his broad shoulders to carve out space underneath the rim and do his job before the rebound comes down. And by doing so, he's able to rebound in the most unique manner I've seen all year. He utilizes the tip-out rebound and the slap-back rebound to perfection. Everything with Mitchell Saxon starts before the shot. So as we see Jordan Ross drive, we'll see Mitchell Saxon get in perfect position to tip out the ball. But let's watch it again to see how he was able to position himself. So as Ryan Nembhard peels off to attempt to box out Mitchell Saxon, watch where he puts his forearm, right in his back and neck. So Ryan Nembhard's out the play. You also might have missed it, but if you didn't, he gave a nice little shove to Graham Ike right there, and that got Graham Ike off balance. So now all he has to do is just extend his arm above the last defender, Ben Gregg, and he's able to win that battle. Saxon is also a genius when it comes to using his leverage. So as the contact is created, his right arm goes under outplay.
I think I'm going to stop this. I think it's too basketball specific. It's interesting though, again, working with what you've got I think is very important. Finding the things that work for you and then dialing into those rather than playing how everyone else wants to play. Let's do the next Brailsford one. Yeah, exactly. Next time maybe I need to vet all these clips and stuff, but we'll work it out. Ones that are useful to talk about and stuff like that. So this is again an even earlier thing from Brailsford. Same situation as before. Nice 90s kind of TV intro. Always good. Early 2000s, I should say, probably.
Hi, I'm Dave Brailsford. I'm the Performance Director of British Cycling, and I'm also the Team Principal of Team Sky.
Don't know if you can hear that, but it's really poorly EQ'd.
It's been a fantastic year for us. We've had a brilliant performance with Bradley Wiggins in the Tour de France, becoming the first ever British rider to win the yellow jersey in the Tour de France. And of course, London 2012, well, what an amazing experience that was for all sports and all the country. And of course, cycling had a fantastic games once again. And I'd like to chat to you a little bit more about how we did that. I think one of my challenges really is I don't coach the riders directly. I coach a team of people, including the coaches, to then coach the riders. If you want other people to perform, it's important that you understand that you need to be a solid rock of consistency. React in the same way, have a good attitude all the time. And I think attitude is very, very important. At a very simple, basic level, when I walk into this building every day, my motivation might be different. It might fluctuate up and down, but really my attitude has to be the same.
That's obviously really hard to do. To make sure that even if your motivation is going up and down, like your attitude is the same. It's just the discipline, but it's hard.
I'm in here to win.
As a coach, it's hard to not get frustrated.
So it's up to me to decide on my attitude. I'm in charge of that. I decide what it is. I'll choose my attitude when I walk into this building, and I think everybody is in the same boat. And I think that's the first and foremost, most important part of any successful program, is to really understand yourself and think about yourself and reflect about yourself and how you operate.
I like that. So it starts with yourself. Whenever we talk about creating a culture, the first step that people don't do enough is think about what's a good culture for you, and then, build it out from there. This ties on to what we were talking about before of players that you don't like, stuff like that. So do you need everyone to be friends? In which case, yes, you should recruit for people who are going to be friends. I think it's a mistake, but you might think that you need to as a coach, and that's fair enough. Like, you need to understand your own flaws. I don't deal well in a team that isn't having fun, so that also does tie to a similar thing. It's not just friends that have fun together, but like I need to be in either a team that takes it seriously or a team that has fun, and that's better. Obviously, it's a bit different in a current situation, streaming and not paid and part-time and online, than it is in a full-time professional team, but still. So this is how they recruited people on this acronym, at least at the start.
What we did at British Cycling, we thought very carefully about how do you achieve excellence in human beings. And basically we came up with an idea, and we called it the core principle. And first and foremost,
something I think is important, don't shy away from fun acronyms and stuff like that and little slogans. It's really important. They people do actually remember them easier. They do go in. You might feel cheesy coming up with them. You might feel cheesy saying it. You might feel cheesy repeating it over and over, but it is actually important.
Of the core principle stood for commitment, and we screen people for commitment. Have they got an intrinsic drive towards achieving a goal? Are they committed to that? And commitment's different to motivation in our book. Motivation ebbs and flows, but commitment's the
I think this one's great. The question I always have, though, is how did they do this? How are you screening people for commitment? Please tell me so I can do the same thing. Because the problem is in an interview, people can be committed. In a trial, people can be committed, if we take the league point of view or the league perspective. And so it's hard to find players who are actually committed. I would say that one of the things that you should do is make sure that you are ruthless around this. And so, yes, you might have recruited people and made a mistake in thinking that they were committed and they're not, but don't hold on to them if they're dragging everyone down. I know Clive Woodward, who, when he was working with the England team, he had this idea of the energy, and people who are an energy, they suck bringing the energy down of people around them. He had a zero tolerance for that. So we got rid of some of the best players because he was look, he gave them a one warning. Your attitude is bringing the energy down of the people around you. And I'm assuming he had specifics. So yeah, I don't know how they screen commitment, but I think that's great. Yeah, that's a big one for me. So the way that I would do recruitment and the way that I would do interviews is, because I developed this when I was talking to teams in the off season, is build a matrices. So a grid 5 this way, and however many principles you want to check this way, and then rate it a little bit like they judge oral exams in language or art exams, for example, where there's just things in the box that it's not like you need people to say those exact things, but you just put a tick in the box when they've demonstrated that thing. So, for example, if we take commitment, you might have on the good side, you might have they've paid from their own pocket for something to make them better that's completely that's outside of the game. And one further in, you might have they've paid out of their own pocket for something to make them better in the game, like they paid for individual coaching or something from Vega V2 or whoever. And one further along than that, it's like they've researched ways to be better outside of the game, you know, and you can put whatever you want in those boxes. And on the left-hand side, you've got like they've never done any, they've never been proactive with their own development. Then I think you can put that as a low mark on the commitment kind of score. But it could be that they just hadn't realised that they ever could, you know, because of the environments that they're in. Or maybe they've got very little team experience, and now we're dealing with that same situation that someone raised earlier, where in league you can get to a professional team having never been on a professional team in anything in your entire life, or never been on a competitive team in anything in your entire life, and that's not true of sport. So those are interesting things. But it would be great to hear how they did it.
Underlying drive to where we want to get to. We have immensely talented coaches and riders who come to this programme, but if the commitment towards the goal isn't present, we won't work with them. It has to be a given. And I think when you're working with other people, one of the first things I would always look for is that commitment element. Having established that there is commitment, we would then move on and consider
it's good
the
that it's like a deal breaker,
which
I
is
think.
ownership.
I agree with that.
And one of the strong beliefs that we had is that not many people
respond
to the old sort of management way of dictate and control.
Again, even by this point, this was hardly revolutionary, but 14 years before this, when they started...
They don't like to be told what to do. They don't like to be given non-negotiated tasks to be
This is still 13 years ago.
To undertake. They like to be asked about their opinion. They don't like to be shouted at. They don't like to be told off. They don't like people who talk about my performance, my riders, you let me down. So I think this whole idea of ownership is something that we try to work on very hard. And the way it basically worked here in British Cycling to take...
I mean, in a way, this is quite similar, right? This is a similar way of describing your explanation of the love coaching. That it's about them and getting the best out of them rather than it's what they can do for your team. I would say ownership is a more practical way of thinking about it, but I'm biased because this is the way I heard it first. And so I'm always going to be biased. You're always biased in coaching to the way you heard it described first. As it's not just in coaching, that's just in general.
Take the initiative and look at the riders and let them have a say in what they were doing. Let the riders and the coaches have a say in how they wanted to have their development plans in place and their coaching programs work, and give them ownership. So the way we now work is that we like everybody to have an opinion.
So the thing with ownership that I think is better is that it gives you practical things that you can actually do. Like, I can't love my players. I don't think I should. I don't want to. I'm sure there are people who do want to, and I'm sure there are people who can. But for me, I can't love all my players. I love some of them at the moment. The ones I know better, in a way. But yeah. I think with ownership you can, and it's also like practical, like we're going to give them more ownership of like when they want to train, how they want to train, those kind of things. So I think that's really important.
And it's not development plans in place and their coaching programs work, and give them ownership. So the way we now work is that we like everybody to have an opinion, and it's not, it's a professional obligation.
I like this.
It's not, we don't expect people to say, well, I'll offer opinion if I want to, or I won't have an individual opinion if I don't want to. You're expected to have an opinion and offer an individual opinion. And then wherever possible, we will work with collective opinion.
This you might recognise, because I've said that multiple times, different Nord teams. We don't have time for people to not offer their opinion and think something's wrong and not say it. So I use that quite a lot. I think that's really good. But again, he's talking about like specifics, what ownership means. And maybe you can't, to be honest, you probably can't do this at the college level. I know obviously American sports and college sports in America are incredibly competitive, but not competitive in line with like Tour de France or the Olympics, you know, like in terms of how much people will have needed to or have already demonstrated all these things. Whereas when they're a student and they've got other things to do, maybe you can't give them ownership and let them choose. And the other thing as well is the sport. You can't have all your players in football, for American football, pick the training program. You could probably have them pick their conditioning program or their like hypertrophy program or strength program, not hypertrophy, strength program, which would be good, and you should probably do that. But you probably can't have them all because they can't all. They have to do the same thing. A lot of them, you don't have the resources to everyone have an individual program. Whereas when you've got a bunch of cyclists who are not that many compared to the amount of coaches, you actually can.
But I think whenever you want to really get the best out of somebody, create an environment where people are free to speak. They don't feel frightened or under scrutiny to speak their minds. If they won't speak to you, they'll speak to somebody behind your back, and all of a sudden the dynamic within a team will disappear. So really think about this idea of how do we develop ownership over something. We talked about taking the crown off the head of the coach and putting it on the head of the rider.
I really love this. It's so hard to do in practice. I think the way that I've started to conceptualize it, because I've been sort of trying to do this my whole coaching career, because obviously this came out before I even got into coaching. Or actually, this video probably came out a little bit after, but this idea came out before. Is that there's this thing, the Tannenbaum-Schmidt model of leadership, which I haven't actually even really looked into, but it's good visualization of it. Oh, it's model of management, I think, rather than leadership. No, it is leadership. Which is this. So this is like full ownership. This is like full authority, like very vertical. Tells, sells, suggests, consults. And what I would say, and the mistakes that I've made in esports in the past, is actually I'm not going to look at these specifically because it would take too long to think about it, but coming too much on this side. And the way that I would approach it now, and the advice that I give people if I'm working with people, is, for me, I think the way to do it is to find your entry point, depending on your players, depending on yourself, depending on what the idea is, all those kind of things, and just think, my goal is to work my way along. My goal is to gradually give more and more ownership and more freedom. And that's the same as the way that I work with other coaches. For example, if I work with a draft coach, the first drafts they do for competitive, I want to see everything. I want to poke holes in it myself. I probably want them to even lay it out in the way that I like it to be laid out, so that I can make sure it's all done. I want to ask them, okay, what do we do if they do that? What do we do if they do that? Okay, what if they ban this? Okay, all those kind of things. And then gradually, by the end, I want to be in a situation where I just ask them, is it ready? And they say, yeah. Cool. Done. You prepared it in however you want to prepare it. I trust that it's fully prepared, all those kind of things. It's like, is it ready? Yes. Do you want to talk about it? Yes or no? So I'm always working that way, which I think is good. Because coming in with full ownership is difficult, and not having enough is also bad. So that's I think a useful thing that I've found in my career.
Giving them some freedom and real ownership over their performance plans and their training plans. And it was amazing what happened. First and foremost, the coaches threw their hands in the air and said, this will never work, they won't turn up for training.
This is what people still say about esports athletes, if you propose the same thing.
Because they're highly motivated. Chris Hoy, for sure, leave him alone. He will turn up for training, whether as a coach here or not, because he wants to be Olympic champion. But what we found was that motivation levels went through the roof. The coaches actually realised that they were there in a support role to manage and support the riders, and everything really started to flourish in the right direction. There was a bit of settling down time, I'll grant you, but in the main,
and again,
actually found...
He's talking about, he's now in 2012, he started in 1998. So when he says a bit of settling down time, it could be months, but it could be years, and it could be that we don't even have the time for the settling down time in esports. So this is one of the things that we're going to have to be constantly on the lookout for, and you guys can keep me honest on it as well if I forget, on both sides. When we look at all these examples from sport, or we look at these cultures that people have built, we're often talking about things that have to take a long time to come to fruition, right? Like Jack, we were talking about Razzie, and okay, he got a bunch of people through a diversity and inclusion program, and a bunch of them were the starting lineup for the first World Cup final, like 5 or something, or 6 players or something, which is ridiculous. he set that up, but it's still like 10 years to come to fruition, you know? So like some of these things might not be possible, but it's interesting to go through anyway. If they follow a system, that would be automatic, right? If we do X, Y, and Z, as long as they agree and you can follow it automatically. I don't quite understand what you're trying to say, but I think so. Yeah. Like, but my point would be full ownership would be they decide that we actually don't do X, Y, and Z. We do A, B, and C instead. So this whole, like, as long as they agree, means you're talking about a different area than right at the one side. That's like the middle, more like. Yeah, that's a good point as well. You see the commitment of each individual more over time, the more freedom they have. And that's where maybe you made a mistake, you know? You take all these players, you think they're committed, in a strict structure they're committed, and then the structure gets more and more loose, and they stop doing the things. And that's why I think having a clear definition of what you think commitment is really useful, because oh yeah, sorry. The messages don't come through instantly because that is my chat bot. So my chatbot has to read them and then post them in here so that we get both. So if you are writing a message, we'll all get better at doing this whole way of doing this podcast, forum, whatever it is. If you write a message, if you can put something that makes it clear what you're referring to, that's always going to be useful because there is that delay. But yeah, sorry, the point from Bumblebee. You will see their commitment more, the more freedom they have. But that's why I think it's very important to define how we see that. And one of the things that we did in the culture stuff, this split, and I think is important to do, is that you need to if you find these terms, for example, so we had hunger as a term rather than commitment, because I used to say commitment, partly because of this. And I think hunger is a bit better for me now because it's more like emotional, and I like that. It's more visceral as a word. We talked about it. We all agreed on it. We also defined what it meant to us, but then also how you see it in other people. That part's really important. And so how do I know you're committed? Because the problem is, I mean, respect is the most obvious one for this, and maybe the best example, but I'll stick with commitment anyway. I might look and say, you're doing no solo queue games, you're not committed to this team. But you're like, no, I'm very committed. I'm doing loads of odd reviews. Or I'm, Jojo just said, I mean, Treats instantly linked it to me. Jojo just said that he thinks the reason they won LEC is because he stopped playing solo queue and started playing ARAMs. Is he committed to the team winning? He stopped playing solo queue. Guys, he's not top of the ladder. He thinks it's the reason they won and the reason that he played so well. So like, what do you do about that? So, for example, for us, we said, okay, right, the way that you show hunger or commitment is you're proactive. And so people come to me and say, like this thing from Wizwire and Treats that you can find on our channel, looking at how to play mid and support. He came to me and said, I really loved how T1 played this game at MSI. Can we go over it? And I was like, yeah, tell Treats, let's do it. Or Hiddo came to me and said, I'm confused about lane swaps. I want to talk about the Chachi. Can we all get in a call? Perfect. That's hunger. That's commitment. That's how you're showing it to me. And I don't need to check how many solo queue games you're playing. Because again, I know that Treats doesn't play solo queue games, but he plays loads of ARAMs. And then he can play any fucking champion because he's played it a lot. So it's really important. But you're right. The more freedom you give, the more it will be, especially commitment, will become on the player. So you might find you took someone who showed that they were committed for the first 6 months, and then as you give them more and more freedom, it starts to fall away. And then what you're going to do?
That this idea of ownership worked terrifically well. The next step is, if you're going to give ownership to somebody, we have to have in all walks of life responsibility and accountability. You can't get away from it. We all have to live with it. It's part of life, and it's important, I think, that accountability is understood and made absolutely clear to every individual, so they understand what they're.
Yeah, I don't think he was sort of really serious. He just said it on stream. But the point still remains, right? Like, he played less and he won. Mad Lions were not screaming very much when they won. Does that mean it's bad? Right, let me jump back and see this again.
We have to have in all walks of life responsibility and accountability.
Responsibility, that's the other side that's the other important side of ownership, which I think is very important. It's like the other side of the coin. And we have a tendency to talk a lot about what, like, players' rights and less about players' responsibilities as coaches. And especially we did that as a real big problem when we first went into the LEC. We spent the whole time talking about, like, oh, we need to get them a chef, we need to get them someone to clean the apartment, we need to get this. It's like, okay, yeah, but wait, we didn't talk enough about what they need to do, like what you're responsible for.
We'll have to live with it. It's part of life, and it's important, I think, that accountability is understood and made absolutely clear to every individual, so they understand what they're accountable for, and equally what they're not accountable for, what's expected from them in performance terms and what's not expected from them in performance terms.
This is really good and ties into the thing that we looked at in the previous video with him in terms of targets and dreams. But again, really, really hard to do in League of Legends, and I'm not sure how you could tie, like, someone's performance, because you can't even do, like, a certain amount of CS per minute in lane, because what if your jungler messes up? You know, like, I don't know how you do it. It would be like accuracy of clicks and working out how you could work out what an accurate click is versus a non-accurate one. Like, it's really, really hard to have individual performance goals, I think, for players that aren't just kind of like really rough overall ones. So X number of solo queue games or whatever.
What's expected in attitudinal terms and what's not expected in attitudinal terms.
Is attitudinal
So I think if you take those four elements, commitment combined with ownership, on top of that you understand and make very clear the responsibility and accountability role, that then leads to excellence. And in fact, it's personal excellence that we're talking about. It's not necessarily on the world stage, it's the best that you can do.
That's really useful, personal excellence. So like the best version of you. And again, this sounds like the love thing, but they never use the word love. And I think for me, I prefer that. Again, I'm definitely preferring it because I'm biased, but I think love is a special word that should be used in special situations. I don't want my wife to hear that I love all my players, especially ones that I've barely met. That was obviously a joke, but the point is, I think it's special, and I think it's not necessarily helpful for us to use the same words.
It's the best that somebody else can possibly be, the best that they can work towards, and excellence for themselves. And I think that's the really important part.
What is this? Okay, we've done the marginal games one. Okay. Should we do another one? Hour and a half. Yeah, we've got two more to do that are currently suggested. So we'll do one more and see.
Yo, what's up?
First 7 minutes of this. Same guy as before. Like that. Oh no.
So we're sitting here at the office at the mine side, having a little conversation about coaching philosophies, because I stayed up late last night watching a truly heartbreaking loss by my LSU baseball Tigers. And I say truly heartbreaking because I feel for the kids that lost in that game. Devin Fontenot absolutely balled out, threw some of the best relief, followed the game before by Todd Peterson's unbelievable relief. And they lost.
Don't know what any of these words mean. Baseball is my least favorite of the American sports.
I'm going to get blackballed in Baton Rouge. You know why they lost? Because there's no coaching philosophy in place. Sorry. It's a recruiting philosophy. No development happening. And so it got us fired up here at the office about what it takes. Back in January, I went and spoke at the American Baseball Coaches Association meeting about this very topic, and I want to share some of that guidance with you. So whether you're a golf coach, baseball coach, whether you're a parent, whoever you are, I want to help you with coaching philosophy. Look, I know I talk about him all the time, but there's a reason why when I say I played for one of the best coaches to ever coach a sport in Skip Bertman, there's a reason, okay? Because he had a philosophy. He had a system in place. He had a program that we followed from the time we entered the program to the time we left. From the time he started in coaching in 1985 to the day he retired in 2001 or 2, whenever it was, there was...
Oh, didn't mean to speed that up. Did I change the thing? No.
Was a system that was in...
I think there's two things. Firstly, I think this is absolutely fantastic to know like why you're doing what you're doing and have some consistency in that. I think at least in esports, we should separate coaching philosophy to recruitment philosophy, but I can understand. I think the way they do it in college sports is more like the head coach is kind of like what we would call the head of LoL. Like they're doing very little coaching and much more around recruitment, or like in like the manager in football, right? Soccer. The one thing I would say is that it would worry me if you haven't updated your coaching philosophy in 20 years, but I think what he means is like the underlying values are the same, which is important, but like also not necessary. Yeah. I would be a little like, because that's an important 20 years as well, you know. Like there's been a lot of information come out in that time that would hopefully make you change what you were doing. And even if we think about what we've just been talking about, like you might have started much more vertical and then ended much more horizontal or much more athlete led, or however you want to say it, athlete ownership kind of approach.
Place, and it was molded and developed. And too many coaches are caught up on the talent of their players, hiding their philosophy. Their philosophy is let the players play, and there's no development. And when somebody does something good, you take credit for it, and when they don't do good, then all of a sudden it's because of some other reason. And that's hogwash. Wherever you coach, whoever you are.
I think this happens kind of like accidentally in league. I don't know. I don't think it's about, I don't quite understand what he means by coaching philosophy, because it's almost like coaching impact. And I guess, again, when you're talking about that many players, it could just be that having a consistent approach is the same as having impact. But that does happen a lot, you know. People join a team that in 1 month then wins a championship and they put it in their Twitter bio forever. It's like, okay, but anyone being there might have won that championship.
Doesn't matter.
What's key would be that you have something written down, so it's challenged by every player you coach. It's an evolving philosophy. Yeah, evolving philosophy I think is a good way to think about it. Because like I say, if you say that it's consistent from the 80s to 2000 or 2005 or whatever he said, I'm worried. But I think I don't think he actually means that.
What level? Whether you coach peewee or you coach professionals, you have to have a philosophy that guides the development of your program and your philosophy of how you develop players. It has to be there. And if it is not there, coaches, I want you to hear this one point right now. If you don't have your philosophy written down, you're failing your players. You're failing.
This, I think, is really good. It's very easy to have something. It doesn't need to be written down like on paper or anything like that. You can even record it in a video format if you want. I think it's probably better to write it down, but you can record it in a video format. It's very easy to have it kind of wishy-washy in your head, and you think it's set, but it is flexing a lot. And it can flex, of course, but you need to work out what can flex and what can't. Like your approach to the game for League of Legends, for example, should definitely be able to flex, because we learn new things. You'll go on a new roster. There's things I've learned from Yankos. There's things I've learned from Chachi. There's things I've learned from Treats. Like I learn things from my players, and that would update that. But the approach of like what I value and that kind of thing, I think that's the part that it's important to make sure you're a bit consistent around, which I think is a good point.
And I can guarantee.
Yeah, but even that, right? So what you need to know, what is your opinion around athlete ownership? And if you don't have that, and you don't have it written down somewhere, or at least you're unbelievably consistent with how you reply to that question, you are less developed as a coach than you should be. And I don't care if you've been doing it for 20 years or 2. You should have that kind of thing set. And it can be set like I just said, right? Okay, I want to find my starting point, which will depend on the roster, depends on the experience and all that kind of thing, and I want to work my way right along that thing of getting closer to ownership, closer to full athlete ownership. So it could be that I start a team, if this whole screen is the way, it could be that I start a team just on one side, or like, sorry, not on one side. Like I could start a team far on the left-hand side. Just getting my pen out. I could start a team here and only take them to here. Okay, this is the wrong color for this. But now I'm committed. You know? Because for whatever reason, I thought we needed to start on this side and we're going this way. But my coaching philosophy is that I want to give as much ownership as I can, and the way that I do that, as I can, is important. And the way that I do that is I find what I believe to be the best starting point, which will be further right the more developed the players are, the more commitment the players have already that I know, and also the more experience that they have, probably, not necessarily, because sometimes experience is a bit fake. The more drive they have internally, and then I want to go this way. And maybe we're only together for a month, so I only go this far. Or for 6 months, and I only go this far. But the goal is to always go this way. So having that kind of thing, like written down, is useful. And written down for me here just means like permanent and able to be looked at by someone else. So I don't think it means this is how I think that the best way to coach, this is the best day structure of a League of Legends team. I don't think that's something that should be written down necessarily. I don't think that's something that is part of my coaching philosophy, and that changes a lot. And to be honest, it would probably change now than it did 6 months ago. Had a conversation with Treats about that the other day, like how I would set up a day for a team. But the other stuff, the deeper stuff, that's the part that can be consistent from the 80s to the 2000s, you know?
I guarantee you, those listening to this, and every time I give this talk for coaches, less than 10% of the coaches have their philosophy written down. You know what that tells me? You're winging it. That tells me that you're flying by the seat of your pants.
No.
That each
I think
and
it's a
every
bit extreme,
day
but
you
okay.
are allowing yourself to be a victim and being played by the circumstances around you. I hope that pisses you off.
I like that though, because it's really important to be proactive around this kind of stuff.
But I hope it forces you to look in the mirror and realize that if your philosophy is not written down, how can you ensure that you're being consistent to every person that you're helping? Now, I'm not saying Paul Maneri doesn't have a coaching philosophy. What I'm actually saying is I just didn't agree with a lot of the decisions that he made. Okay? That's not here for there, but you make that kind of money, you open yourself up for that style of criticism.
I think he did say at the beginning that they had no coaching philosophy, but that's okay.
But why do certain coaches continue to win? Why do we see the same programs? See, coaches that don't succeed can look across the street at a coach that's succeeding and go, well, it's because they get the best players. It's because they have better scholarship opportunities. We used to hear that at LSU all the time. It's because Skip can put players and just have 50 players on his roster. Really? We won the national title in 91. I think we had 36. I think the roster limits today are 35. It's not harder to win now. It's always hard to win. But it's impossible to win if you don't have a philosophy.
I think this is where like I'll bring back one of the things from the video we just watched of like the excellence, like personal excellence. Because I do think that you have to know as a coach that your team might not be capable of winning, you know? Like, again, we use the Tadej Pogačar example. Like, Visma can play it absolutely perfectly. Again, haven't watched them on 1-2 stage. Maybe something changes. But it looks like, doesn't matter if you play it perfectly or not, he's the greatest bike rider ever. So, unlucky. And so you have to be quite clear, both as a coach and also anyone else involved in the deeper structure of like what our goals are. So for example, if you're the 10th budget in the LEC, your smallest budget, absolutely, you should be not trying to come 10th. But it might not be beneficial for you to try and win. This is actually one of the things that I almost never push back in the coach talk interviews that I did, but one of the things I almost pushed back on, or did a little bit, with Romain, when he was saying every team should be trying to win the LEC and every team should be trying to win Worlds. The decisions that you make to try and win the LEC might not necessarily be the decisions you make if you're the 10th budget team to do as well as you can in the LEC. And that's an important distinction that I think we should be clear on. So sometimes, yeah, the other team has the best players. But for example, I won't say who, but I know people at Fnatic were like, we just have to try loads of different things to beat caps, and maybe it's just impossible and that kind of thing. Well, Koi and KC just did it this year, so it's obviously not possible. Although obviously it was against G2 both times, so they were still, everyone else changes and caps is pretty consistent. He's pretty fucking hard to beat, but it's a team game.
That's written down and developed. Why is Chick-fil-A? Why is Ruth Chris? Why is Ritz-Carlton so good? Because there's a way that they do business that every person, every manager, every supervisor, every director follows.
I think
if you ask people from...
Let me think about that comparison. The reason that I'll use McDonald's because it's more global than Chick-fil-A is so successful is because of their written down philosophy. I mean, maybe. I do think that there's a really interesting point from Rory Sutherland, who's a advertising person who's also very into behavioral economics, who's incredibly interesting. It's not really about coaching, but there's a lot of good things to pick up from it. Talks about the fact that like the genius of McDonald's is that it might not be ever very good, but it's never bad. And you can go to a Michelin star place and it could be the best meal of your life, but it also could be bad. And you could genuinely not like it. Whereas like you know exactly what you get when you know exactly what you get when you go there. Like, and so it's even stuff like normally for food, right? You would be taught to not overwork the meat, and McDonald's burgers are so overworked, and that's also because for that reason they're the same everywhere. Or like Starbucks, they burn the coffee. I'm sorry if you like Starbucks. Technically, they burn the coffee, but they do it intentionally so that every time you go into Starbucks, it's always the same. Because otherwise you couldn't even get the same beans because they would have transported different places, different amount of time. Like coffee is incredibly varied. And so for everyone to go into Starbucks and have the same experience, they have to burn the coffee. So I think the comparison is interesting, but I think it's a bit strange. That's a really good point, actually, Jack. Yeah, that's a really good point. Every person frying chips isn't applying their own technique to the chips frying. They're using a technique that's the same from everyone. That's true. That's a really good point. The LR roster change, I think, is just for this 1 week, right? So I won't talk about it. Okay.
Disney.
Well, there is a reason not to be 10th if you're on that team. No one likes coming 10th. I don't care if you're enjoying being in the LEC or not.
What's the Disney way? They'll tell you the 10-step process or 8-step process, whatever it is. I'm not a part of it, so I don't know it. But I can guarantee if I ask anybody who's been a cast member at Disney, they can tell you. So coaches, why don't you have your stuff written down? Why don't you know? Because that's the issue. See, you don't know. You don't really know what makes you better.
I know why you don't have stuff written down. It's because it's hard to write it down, man. It takes a lot of time. It takes so much more effort than you think. It's a difficult process to stare at an empty piece of paper. And so you absolutely should.
You don't really know what makes your players better. Do you have your developmental plan written down to make you better?
One thing I would say is that I wouldn't do this for a developmental plan in League because, like I say, the game changes so quickly. And you will be not until you're Dylan or Mac or whoever who's been doing it at the top level for a long time, because you have to be very flexible on that. And even those people, it should change a bit, you know. Whereas baseball has been the same for rather a long time.
Are you still winging that too? Do you have a plan of books you're going to read, people you're going to call in the industry, people you're going to call outside the industry to make you better?
I don't think you necessarily need to write down a reading list, personally. I don't know if that's controversial. I also don't think you need one. I think if you like reading, it's amazing and you should do it a lot. But if you don't like reading, I don't think nowadays you should think that that's the only way to get knowledge. If you prefer to listen to TED Talks or podcasts or whatever, do that. Find the thing that you like and tunnel into that. I think that's very good. I mean, books are really good. I think the best way I heard it described is like a podcast compared to a book is like a podcast is a photograph. It's like one moment, and books are like a painting where you can go back over the same thing over and over and make sure it's exactly how you want it before you say it's done. And so for writing it down, it's much better than talking about it, because it's easier to, unless you write it down and then talk about it in the video. Like what I'm saying now, I haven't planned, obviously. So if you're writing it down, it's easier from that point of view. But I would say, I think it's great if you could teach yourself to like reading, and you should. But I'm just saying there are other ways of getting knowledge. Yeah, I know. For me, it's almost like two things. I think writing down your coaching philosophy and being clear on your coaching philosophy, for me, is the most important thing from all this that he's saying that we can all take. But also, like, it is good to write down the stuff that you've listened to, but it's not hard. It's just a lot of effort. So like, I haven't updated my reading list actually a little bit. I need to do that. I should do that. But I didn't even have one until recently. Recently, like relative to how long I've been doing this.
Do you have information in place that's your go-to when a player is struggling, that you can give them some resources and say, hey, look, 8 years ago, I had a player going through very much the same thing that you are. Here's something that
I mean, listen to that. 8 years ago, even as his example, right? So it's less important to write stuff down when we have a 1 year, like a 6 month attention span. I hope we're all in esports in 8 years, but who knows?
I would suggest that you do. Or do you just wing it? I know that's kind of a harsh statement to say, but coaches, don't play hunches. Don't. Play educated guesses and make strategic decisions based on your philosophy. So,
what's the difference between a hunch and an educated guess, other than the connotation? I guess he's saying if you know what you believe and you know what your approach is, then you can make educated guesses that go along the same reason. So you're saying a hunch is I think, and I know from experience is an educated guess, because that's not what those words mean. But if you want to think that that's what he means, then it could well be right. But this is again my problem. Like, if you're using words that mean certain things and you don't explain what you mean by them, if you don't mean the same thing, like an educated guess is a guess that has some like reasoning and stuff behind it. It doesn't have to be experience. It could be an educated guess based on our best approximation of what would happen, or based on the fact that we've looked through all the possibilities and this is the most likely for this and this reason. It doesn't have to be, it can be new. I think as well, it depends on what kind of thing you're doing, because if you want to be the best at something, you will have to go on hunches, because otherwise you're just going to copy what we already know from experience, in which case you'll always be behind, right?
How do we get a philosophy in place? Where do we even start? I tell you what, it's the summer right now. Here's what you do. You go get an 8.5 by 11 pack of paper, printer paper. That's fancy. Guess what? We're going to develop one here that's going to blow your mind, okay? But we're going to start with the low-key approach. And you get a pen, and you go to a coffee shop, go to a wine bar, you go somewhere, and you sit down, and you say at the top of the paper, ready for this? Okay, this is
wine bar's a great place to do it.
What is my philosophy? And you start writing everything down. If you're a golf coach, what is your philosophy about the swing? What is your philosophy about putting stroke? What is your philosophy about game management? What is your philosophy about...
I would start, I love this, but I would also start like deeper than that before you get to game specifics.
Developing junior players. What is your philosophy about...
You could do both, actually. Whatever order you want, actually. He's right.
Difficulty.
Just whatever
What is your
want.
philosophy on how to deal with general managers? What is your philosophy about how to raise money? What is your philosophy on tournament stress and anxiety? What is your philosophy about dealing with somebody like me? If you're a college golf coach, what is your philosophy about dealing with swing coaches, putting coaches, physios, mental coaches? Or are you just going to wing it? I know you're not going to wing it. So let's get a plan in place. If you're a baseball coach, what is your recruiting philosophy? How do you deal with your fundraisers? How do you deal with a first and third and nobody out? What is your philosophy there? How do you deal with pitchers who have arm soreness? And how do you deal with catchers?
Okay. That was the part that you linked. We could do the rest of this another time. It's been nearly 2 hours, so I think I'm gonna stop it there. But I think it's really good. I think as well, like, you have to be kind of confronted with that blank page, and it's difficult. And going through everything, I think okay, I changed my mind. I think any order is all right. You can start with the game stuff if that's easier to start with, and then you can think through how you think about like how much ownership that you would give, how you should give feedback, what kind of environment you like, what kind of culture you want to aim for, and then you can think about everything else in between, like what you want from the organization. How are you gonna managing up is a really important one. So he mentioned GMs there. Like, how are you gonna talk to whoever your boss is, and how are you gonna make sure you get the best out of them? I think that's probably the biggest mistake that I made in my coaching career, is that I didn't do good managing up. And at Excel in the LEC, what that meant was the project went a different direction from the way it should have done, and the way I think it should have done. And the person who was directly superior to me got his own way, which was, I think, the worst decision they ever made, and the reason it all fell apart. But then at Solari, for example, the reason I didn't, the downside of not managing up well was, at the end of the day, I think they went a different direction. Again, actually, both times. So all that kind of thing is really useful. Like, how are you going to approach that? Yeah, exactly. Like, I think you should show it to people, but you don't have to show them the scrap of paper that you're doodling on. If you have one small section, you think, this is how I think teams should approach the early game. Okay, I'm going to show that to someone. And let's see. Then I think it's really good. I think I'd go about it like that. Well, for me, this was really good. Got to relive some videos and stuff that have been very important to me, but also see some stuff that I'd never seen before. So I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to do more. So if you're interested in submitting any videos or clips, join my Discord, and then there is a section there called Coach Forum, which has topic suggestions where you can just drop in a bunch of videos. If more stuff comes up, do drop it in. I think we're going to go for like 10-20 minutes max, 20 minutes max. So we could have done this whole thing, but probably not at the end. We could do the rest of this. There's already one video that's coming for the next one. We'll probably try and do a couple of hours, because I start not making sense after a couple of hours of talking. But yeah, I hope that was useful. And if you liked it, please do like, share, subscribe. Tiny little channel, so all those kind of things do make a big difference. If you just show it to one person, one other coach you think might benefit from this, even that is really, really great from my side, and we can just keep this kind of thing going, because I will find the clips myself, and I will find stuff that I want to look at, but probably will also I'll really appreciate if I can have more stuff that I've never seen from you guys. So let me just look at my calendar. I think tomorrow we have competitive games, so I'm going to be streaming from